Hello, and welcome to our Sunday stream. Um, Let me think. We're playing Magic today, and we do sort of beginner slash teaching Magic on Sundays, and then on Wednesdays we do sort of normal games. Each of these games are kind of whatever I choose to play, but on Wednesdays it could be any number of about like 90 different commander decks that I have. And right now we are doing Guild Wars. So we are taking two color pairs of Magic and we are facing off to see which one of them is the best one. It's not really the best one, but we are down to our third week of that. And then after that, we'll figure out what the next thing will be. But for Sundays, we kind of do a sort of a slower game with decks that don't have too complicated strategies. They're pretty much just play cards that go together and then attack. And that's intentional. So there's 10 different beginner decks that I've made, commander decks. There's two for each color. So we are playing the green, the blue, and the red one. And between the two different decks, I've made them what's called tribal decks, which means that they're focused primarily around one kind of creature, intentionally so, and it makes it so that it's easier to kind of get those cards to work together because they have a lot of abilities that help each other out. And then again, it's built on the sort of premise that they are aggro decks, which just means that we're almost entirely focused on trying to take out our opponent's life total and win the game that way. Now, that being said, there's still some room for trickery and stuff like that, but I try to keep it a little bit easier for people who are new to Magic or just kind of learning the ropes. So let's go and get started. And this first deck that we have is the Elf tribal deck. So the big tribe. So this is a small tribe. So they're all small creatures. That's the other thing I forgot to mention is that one tribe will be for each color pair will be small creatures, and then the big tribe will be bigger creatures. So the sort of big tribe equivalent or beginner deck for green is Hydras. So we're going to be playing Elves, which our commander is Azuri Renegade Leader, and with commander we try to focus our deck around or build around a commander or sort of the general for our army. And in this case, it's Azuri. It needs to be a legendary creature. And then when you build the deck, at least for commander's purposes, our commander deck has to have only the colors that our commander does. They just, for whatever, they just abhor seeing any other kind of color. So with Azuri's only a green commander, so we only use green cards. And in addition to that, we can only have one of each card in the deck. That's sort of another rule for Magic. Now, the Elves' strength, and especially most of the small tribe strengths, are that they can play a bunch of small creatures out really quickly and then start attacking early. Whereas the big tribes are kind of the opposite way. They're very slow in the beginning, but then they make really big creatures that make up for it. And those come out a little bit later, but they can end up being just as strong as a bunch of little creatures. So when we start out our hand, we actually have a special hand today. We have this card called Leyline of Abundance. So Leyline of Abundance has it that if you have it in your opening hand at the beginning of the game, then you can start the game with it on the battlefield. So we're absolutely going to do that. And it's ability that, or it's an enchantment that normally costs 4, but we don't have to pay anything for it this time. So what ends up happening is that whenever we tap a creature for mana, we can add an additional green mana to that mana. And then it has a second ability where you pay 6 colorless and 2 green to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So that's going to be really, really strong later on. For now, though, we're really focused on the small creatures, and elf decks are, especially in green, green is really good at making a bunch of mana and then making something strong, and that's kind of exemplified in Ley Line of Abundance, where we get additional mana for doing the things that we already like to do, and then we can use that mana to make our creature stronger. So we have an elf that untaps mana, or untaps our lands. We have an elf that taps for mana. And then we have this really cool one called Voice of the Woods, which once we have a bunch of elves, we're actually going to make bigger creatures because we have those elves. Now, it'll be a little bit before we get to this point. For now, what we're going to do is, so we start off with that on the battlefield. We go to our, like our first turn, and the turn order always starts off the same way. We untap everything that we have. So untapping just means, well, when you tap a card, it just means that you're using the card's energy to do something. In the case for lands produce mana. Creatures can activate abilities or attack. And there's a number of other cards that do similar stuff like that. So the first thing you do is untap everything that you control that's currently tapped. Then you go to an upkeep step, which is sort of just a beginning cleanup kind of step. There's things that can happen, abilities that can trigger, but normally nothing will happen during the upkeep. And then we draw the first card for the turn. Our first card is Guardian Project. Ooh, that's a good one. So Guardian Project is an enchantment that makes it so that whenever we have a creature come into play, if it's a non-token creature and it doesn't share a name with any other creature, then we get to draw a card. So we're going to use that to kind of play elves to draw more elves. And the other thing being, since we can only have one of any card in our deck, then Guardian Project's kind of downsides are actually mitigated because we're not playing anything that has the same name as something else anyway. So that'll be good. Let's go ahead and start though. We will play a forest and then we will tap it for 1 mana to play our Arbor Elf. So Arbor Elf is 1 green, 1/1, and untap target forest. So Arbor Elf has Summoning Sickness this turn, so it can't attack on the turn that it comes out. But next turn, we'll be able to play a second forest, and then we can actually play something for 3 mana if we wanted to. So for now, we're just going to let this go and pass the turn to our next deck, which is Mono Blue Thopters. So Thopters are pretty cool because they make a bunch of, or Thopters in general are 1/1 flyers. So whereas the elves that we make are probably going to be just regular 1/1s, the tokens that we make here, the bunch of Thopters that we make are going to be flying as well as being 1/1. So that's going to be really useful later on. That being said, we have So Psy Master Thopterist is our commander, and he is a 3-cost 1/4 creature. I should say so. His cost here is 2 colorless and a blue, and the 2 colorless means that you can pay any mana to be able to pay for that cost, but the blue symbol means that you have to use a blue mana. In addition to 2 other mana of any color of your choosing. Since we're pretty much only doing blue cards, and our lands will pretty much entirely be islands that produce blue mana, that's not so much of a concern. But when you get into 2-color decks, then it gets a little trickier, or just more color decks at all. So Psy Master Thopterus is really cool, so that whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. So essentially, we're going to play a bunch of artifacts, and each time we do, we're going to get a free artifact that's a creature in addition to it. And then his second ability is pay a colorless and a blue, sacrifice 2 artifacts to draw a card. So that's going to be really cool. So if we need to get more artifacts, like we're having trouble getting enough artifacts, then we can actually use his ability to sacrifice the cards that we got in order to draw more cards and hopefully draw into a really good artifact. Now, our starting hand here is a little wonky. I'm not normally one to take hands like this because so if you look here, this is we have 6 lands and 1 artifact. I mean, well, one of our lands is an artifact, but we only have really 1 artifact to play. That's not normally how we'd want this deck to go. We'd want probably 3 fewer lands, so basically just enough to be able to cast our commander, and then all of the rest of these be artifacts or other draw spells or stuff like that. I'm taking this experimentally because I do kind of want to see how well Sai Master Thopterist recovers. So the cool thing about it is that essentially when we get to our 3rd turn, we can cast Sai, and then on our 4th turn, we'll play Junk Diver, which will get us a free artifact. And then we can sacrifice artifacts to try to draw more cards, and hopefully we can essentially draw our way out of the sort of issue that we have here with too many lands. And the reason that that's possible, like it's possible to be able to do that because Sai allows us to draw more cards. So normal commanders may not be able to do something like that. You may not be able to rely on them solely to be able to draw you out of a problem. But blue's strength, whereas green strength is making a bunch of mana, blue's strength is actually drawing a bunch of cards. And the more cards we draw, the better position that we'll be in later. Because, like say we draw 4 cards and our opponents together only draw 2 cards. Well, we actually are going to have some amount of advantage because we have more opportunities. More cards, more opportunities. That's an underlying theory, major theory for how Magic works as a game and how card games work in general. So we're going to go ahead and untap. So we don't have anything to untap. We don't have anything for our upkeep. So we will go to drawing a card. And our first card for the turn is Antiquities War. So this will be good later on. I don't want to get too heavy into this, but this one will be able to allow us to find artifact cards and then turn them into powerful creatures for a single turn. So we're going to hold off on that for now. And like I said, we're just going to go ahead and play our island. We don't have anything else to do for the turn, so we will just go ahead and pass. Now, the third deck that we have is again it's going to have a little bit of a rough hand, but we're going to see if we can get ourselves out of this one as well. So Goblins is our third deck for the day. And Goblins, so green is really good at mana. Blue is really good at drawing cards. Red is really good at going really, really fast. That's not like entirely accurate, but red is sort of the color for chaos, and I don't know, passion, I guess you could say. I need to remember the terminology that people use a lot of the time. So anyway, so we are going to try to make as many goblins as we can, as quickly as we can, and just essentially flood the battlefield. Yeah, go goblins, go. So the reason why I decided to take this hand is because this is actually the opposite hand to the blue deck. So, well, I guess let's first talk about the commander a little bit. So the commander costs 2 colorless and a red, and it starts out as a 1/2 creature. Now, Krinko 10 Street Kingpin has this really cool ability that whenever he attacks, he makes himself 1 power stronger. And then after you make him 1 power stronger, you put a number of goblins into play equal to its power. So he essentially creates more and more goblins every turn that he attacks. So we're going to try to attack with him every turn that we possibly can. Now, this is the wonky hand number 2. And in this case, like I said, it's kind of opposite to the blue deck. We are starting off with only 1 land, which normally I would not advise doing unless you are really familiar with your deck and you know the cards that are in it that can get you out of that situation. I wouldn't recommend it. Normally with goblins, we'd want preferably 2 lands, maybe 3, depending upon how many other cards we have in our hand. because we basically want to guarantee that we can get Krinko out. Now, here's the difference, is that we have Goblins are really good at playing everything low cost. So the highest costing cards in the deck are about 4 mana. So I think there's maybe 1 6 cost. There's just not very many that's more than 4 mana. So within the deck, we only really need more like 3 to 4 lands to be able to play everything that we have. So Krinko is definitely on the high list, and then we do have this 3 cost card, so that's a little high. But then we have 2 1 cost cards and 2 2 cost cards. So we only really need like 1 more land, and we can actually get going really, really well. And the way that we're going to do that is with this card called Faithless Looting. Faithless Looting draws you 2 cards, then you discard 2 cards. So we're going to essentially be able to see the top 3 cards of our deck the first turn of the game. And hopefully that will mean that we'll be able to get at least 1 more land so that we can start making progress on stuff. Now, we do have to discard 2 cards to be able to do that, so we'll have to really take some serious consideration about what the best cards to get rid of are. But for now, we're going to attempt to play this hand and see how well it goes, and kind of show you that there are different ways to play, and something with like a low mana hand or a high mana hand, we can work our way out of it if we know what we're doing. And if we make really good choices, we may be able to get ourselves out of it. So let's go ahead and start the turn. So we have untap. We don't have any cards to untap. We don't have anything during our upkeep, so we will draw a card for the turn. And our first card is Mountain. Look at that. That's exactly what we wanted to see. That is perfect. So we are still going to do our initial plan. We are going to go ahead and use that Mountain to cast our Faithless Looting. So we will draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. So let's go ahead and see what 2 cards we draw. And that is Hellraiser Goblin. And then we have Valakut, the Molten Pinnacles. So there you go. There's our 3 lands. We only really need 1 more land to be able to do everything that we'd want to do. So that's really, really good news for us. Now let's see. We're not going to discard either of these 2 cards. We do have a kind of easy choice here. We have a card, a goblin that makes creatures we control have haste and attack each turn if able, or we have an artifact that does the same thing. Now, between the 2 of these, I know that a lot of the cards in different of these beginner decks are removal-based stuff. So I'm kind of inclined to pick Hammer of Perforos here as a card we want to keep, because I think we want to keep one of the 2 of these, because it'll come in really good handy later on. So I would say that Hellraiser Goblin is a card that generally will be more vulnerable compared to just is more vulnerable as a card because it's a creature instead of being an artifact. Plus, this does have a second ability to be able to create creatures that can then attack if we decide to. Now, the thing with that is, the risk that we're taking is that green is really good at destroying artifacts and enchantments. So that does mean that we will run the risk of having green being able to destroy our Hammer of Perforos at a very inconvenient time. That being said, in general, Hammer of Perforos is probably going to be the better card to keep here. So we are going to go ahead and discard the Hellraiser Goblin. So we're keeping that. We still need 1 more card. So Krinko Mob Boss is an exceptionally strong card. I think we do want to keep that one. Goblin Recruiter is a really, really good card. So Krinko taps to create goblins. So the more goblins you have, the more goblins he creates. So he's going to be a really good sort of late game card to help us push through damage when we really need it. Goblin Recruiter, on the other hand, is a little different in that Goblin Recruiter allows us to search our library for any number of goblins and essentially put them on top of our library. So he's going to be good at finding us an answer card the moment we need it. So I think it's good to go ahead and keep him. So we're between these 2 cards. And we have a 1-cost goblin and a 2-cost goblin. I am kind of thinking that this 1-cost goblin, the good thing about it is that it gives +1/+, like when you play it, you can pay an extra red so that all of your creatures get +1/+0 and haste. So we're back kind of to that. Well, we do have a haste card in here. Do we really need another haste card? And it does pump our creatures for a single turn, but Grinzo Havoc Raiser does something possibly even better. It allows us to, whenever we deal combat damage, we can goad one of our opponent's creatures. And goad means that we can force them to attack and not attack us. We force them to attack an opponent. So Grinzo is going to be really good later on to essentially negate other players' creatures when they're attacking, and hopefully use their own creatures against them by making them get rid of an opponent. So I think Grinzo, in this case, is a better card to keep, so we will go ahead and keep this hand. And our Faithless Looting goes to the graveyard after resolving, and we are done with this round of turns. So we are going to go back to the Elf deck and see what they're capable of. See what they are going to do next. And most likely, knowing Elves, it's going to be making a bunch of elves, or mana, or both. So, let's see. Let us untap this land. We will draw a card for the turn, and it is Jiraga Warcaller. Wow. Talk about good cards. Jiraga Warcaller is a really good one. He'll essentially make it so that creatures, elves that we control, will be really strong whenever they come out, or at least a lot stronger than they would be otherwise. So that's going to be really useful here soon. Let's see now. I think we do. So looking at our hand, we have 2 lands. We have a land that comes into play tapped. I think we want to go ahead and do it now because the other card that we're going to play... So we do have the ability to play a 3-cost card, but really we want to be able to get up to our Guardian Project for mana, and that we can do that next turn. So what we're going to do instead is go ahead and tap 1, 2 here. We're going to tap Arbor Elf to untap this forest, and then we will retap it in order to cast Devoted Druid. And the reason I'm doing that is because Devoted Druid taps for 2 mana instead of 1 mana. So that means that next turn we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana, so that we can cast anything that we have in our hand. Most likely, we'll play this other land, so we'll have 6 mana, which means that we'll be able to have Guardian Project online next turn, and maybe even play an Elf next turn. So I think that's going to be much more useful than trying to play Azuri or something this turn. It's better to try to get mana out fast before we try to do any kind of shenanigans. So we're going back to our Thopter deck, and we will untap, draw a card, or untap, upkeep, draw a card, and we got another island, which is not exactly what I wanted to see, unfortunately. So let us go ahead and play an island and hope that next turn we get another artifact, because otherwise we're going to be a little bit slow with sacrificing our own stuff. So let's move back to the Goblin deck and see what they can do. So untap, draw a card. It is Disrupt Decorum, which is a sorcery, a 4-cost sorcery, 2 colorless, 2 red to play, and it has Goad all creatures you don't control, which again is sort of that ability. Goad just means that your next turn, any creature that was out that has been goaded must attack their next available combat, and they have to attack a player other than you. So this is going to be sort of a clinch card later on to try to force our opponents to hurt each other instead of us. Okay. So looking at our hand, we could do a mountain and be able to play Grinzo or the Goblin Recruiter, but really we want to make sure that we play Krinko on turn 3. So I think it might be smarter to go ahead and play the Valakut this turn because it comes into play tapped. So we won't do anything else this turn. It's kind of another slow turn, but next turn we'll get Krinko out and then we'll be able to start trucking. So going back to the elf deck, the elves are going to untap, upkeep, draw a card, and it is another forest. So not great, but that's okay. We will play that forest. Then we will, let's see, we want to 1, 2, 3, 4 mana in order to cast our Guardian Project. So Guardian Project will be whenever a non-token, it's a 4-cost enchantment, 3 colorless, 1 green. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. So I think what we're going to do here is we're going to tap this Arbor. Well, let's see. Do we want to do that? We haven't played a land this turn. That's the thing that I was missing. Let's see. 3. No, we did play a land this turn. So, because we just drew another forest. So we should have a forest in hand. Okay, let's think about this. So, I think that... that is tricky. So we could force it and draw a card this turn by getting Azuri out, because Devoted Druid has a pretty cool ability. If you put a -1/-1 counter on Devoted Druid, then you can untap it. Now, its toughness is only a 0/2, so it can't do that too many times, but we could get an extra mana here if we really wanted to. The question is whether it's a smart thing to do that now or if it would be better to wait till later. And I think that if we try to do it now, we may be rushing it a little too much, which would be unfortunate. I think we do want to go ahead and hold off. I don't think we absolutely need to do something this turn. So let's go ahead and just pass on to the Thopter deck. And we're not going to attack anything. We're not going to do anything else. We're just going to leave it like this and be okay. So the Thopters are going next. They don't have anything to untap and nothing during their upkeep, so we'll draw a card. And oh wow, our card draw is Prototype Portal. That's really, really, really good. This is better than you think it is. This is going to be a really good setup. So we were going to play an artifact land this turn. Instead, we're going to go ahead and play an island, and we will get to the Prototype Portal next turn, I promise. So we will tap 2 mana, or 3 mana, in order to cast our commander from the command zone. And we're doing this because it means that we'll be able to start playing artifacts next turn and getting an advantage. This Prototype Portal, just wait, I'll show you something really, really cool. Okay. So, Goblins next, and we know what good Goblins are going to do. They're going to be getting serious. We gotta get the Goblins going. We gotta invade with the Goblins. Take down those darn Elves. So untap, upkeep, no upkeep, so draw a card. Tormenting Voice, which is a 2-cost sorcery. It has, as an additional cost to casting it, you have to discard a card, and then we draw 2 cards. So that's cool. We're going to hold on to that for now until we're kind of desperate and we need to draw cards. Right now we have a really good hand, so I think we're okay with the drawing portion. So let's go ahead and play the last mountain that we have in hand, and we will tap all 3 mana in order to cast Krinko, 10 Street Kingpin. Now, I think one thing I forgot to mention a little bit earlier was that Valakut is a pretty cool card. So essentially what it does is the more mountains we play, once we get to a certain point, essentially it's a volcano that starts erupting. And every time we play a mountain, it erupts again and deals damage to something. So there's easy ways to take extreme advantage of that. We're not particularly doing that in this Goblin deck. We're going to pass the turn, by the way. I'm just going to keep talking. With the Goblin deck, the Valakut that we're using is sort of an incidental type thing. We want to be able to take advantage of it since we're essentially playing just a bunch of mountains in the deck. But we're not like taking advantage of it like a lands-based deck might to try to essentially combo off and kill somebody with it. Okay. So untap, upkeep, draw a card, and it is Growing Rights of Itlamok. Oh, cool. Okay, let's see. That's actually really cool. So we're going to go ahead and play that, actually. We'll play a forest first. Then we will tap 1, 2, 3 mana, and we will cast Growing Rights of Itlamok. So it is a legendary enchantment that has, when it enters a battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. So that's what we'll do. And we can reveal a creature card from among them and put it into our hand, and then put the rest on the bottom of our library. At the end of our turn, if we control 4 more creatures, we transform this card. And transform just means that it has a backside. So there's something on this backside, something special that we'll get to do if we're able to flip it over. So let's look here. And man, there's only one creature that's... I mean, we want all of these cards, honestly, but we can only pick one, so we're going to pick Priest of Titania, because the reason being is that Priest of Titania... Oh, man, well... That is tricky. Elvish Guidance is a really good card, and we do have Arbor Elf, but I think we want to do Priest of Titania because we're going to get an advantage with Guardian Project. So we're going to put these on the bottom. The reason we're taking Priest of Titania is that it has... tap, add a green mana to your mana pool for each elf you control. So we are going to do exactly that. We are going to pay 2 mana. We're going to cast Priest of Titania. So that means that because we cast a creature, we draw a card, and it is Nature's Claim. Wow, that's... Well, I told you that green was good at destroying artifacts and enchantments, and this is a 1-cost green spell that destroys an artifact or enchantment. Okay. Let's see what else we can do, because I think that in this case, now we do want to untap Devoted Druid, and the reason being is that we can, this turn, activate Growing Rights of Itlamok. So we are going to tap Arbor Elf to untap a forest. Then we are going to put a -1/-1 counter on Devoted Druid to untap it. So we're going to denote that with this right here. It actually might be better for it to be upside down. So when I do counters, if I want it to be +1/+1, I put it up on the picture to be like, this is a good thing. When I put it down here, I intend for it to mean that it's a bad thing. Essentially, it means that Devoted Druid is now a -1/1 creature. So if we do this thing one more time, it actually will kill Devoted Druid unless we find some way to stop that. So we are going to tap Devoted Druid for 2 mana because of our Leyline of Abundance. We will tap this forest, so now we have 3 mana, and we will cast our commander from the command zone. And when we do that, Guardian Project activates, we draw a card. It is Heritage Druid. That's really good. For now, though, we will keep that to ourselves because instead we are actually going to do the second ability on this Oran Reef, the Vastwood, which has tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So both our commander and Priest of Titania get 1 power stronger. So that's really cool. Let's go ahead and move them like this so we can see. I put them up on the on the image side of the card to be able to denote that it's a +1/+1 counter. Now, at the end of our turn, we get a trigger. We get Growing Rights of Itlamok. So now it transforms. So we are going to flip it over to its backside. And the backside is Itlamok, Cradle of the Sun. It is a legendary land that can tap for 1 green mana, but it can also tap to add a mana to your mana pool for a green mana for each creature you control. So this one land now taps for 4 mana. How crazy good is that? Elves are booking it today. Elves got a lot going for them, and now we are in a really, really strong position here with the Elves, which is kind of intentional. So like each of the other decks, they have their strengths. Elves definitely have their strengths as well. So we're getting back to the Thopters, and now we can reveal the thing that I was going to do. So untap, not an upkeep, draw a card, Master Transmuter. That's pretty good. Okay, so we are going to play an island, and then we will pay 4 mana to cast our prototype portal. So since we cast a artifact card, we get a little Thopter. So there's our Thopter. Now, when prototype portal enters a battlefield, you can exile an artifact card from your hand. We are going to exile Darksteel Citadel. So, what does that mean? It means that we can pay X mana, where X is the converted mana cost of the exiled card, and tap Prototype Portal, and then we put a token into play that's a copy of the exiled card. The thing is that, so there's mana cost and there's converted mana cost. Mana cost is the exact mana that you have to pay in order to cast a spell. So in this case, Master Thopterus is 2 colorless and 1 blue. That's its mana cost. Converted mana cost means you take all of the mana that's required, you change it into just pure numbers, add it all together, and that's the converted mana cost. In this case, Master Thopterist's converted mana cost is 3 because it costs 2 colorless and 1 blue, so that makes 3. Well, lands, in particular this Darksteel Citadel that we exiled, its converted mana cost is 0 because it doesn't have a mana cost. That means that we can tap Prototype Portal and create a free land. It costs nothing. So essentially, we are going to be creating free, indestructible lands every turn, in addition to whatever lands we end up playing. So let's go ahead and draw a little bit of a Darksteel Citadel here so that we remember what it is. We won't do it every turn just because it gets a little too tedious to do that. It's Darksteel Citadel. And then we will do let's see. I want to be sure that we don't make something obscene here. Even though it already kind of looks maybe like it could be. Let's see. I think we get a little bit here, and this picture is a little wonky, so I'm just kind of making it up as I go. Okay, that's probably good enough for now. There's our Darksteel Citadel. Now we have a copy of it, so now we just have free mana every turn. It can go a really long way. Now, that being said, Elves are absolutely outpacing us in mana production, but that being said, this combination right here, doing Prototype Portal with an artifact land, is always a really strong ability. So we're going to go ahead and pass the turn over to Krinko and see what the Goblins can do with their turn. So we will untap, draw a card. It is a mountain. We'll go ahead and play that because we don't have any other mountains. We are going to almost certainly this turn let's see. So I think that we're going to attack first. We have 4 mana. We know what we're probably going to do, but we don't want to give away what we might be doing or what our next direction might be. So we're going to go ahead and attack with Krinko. And like I said, his ability means that he gets 1 power stronger, and then he creates a goblin. And we are going to attack the Thopter deck because the elves have strong elves already. So instead, we are going to just tap. We'll attack the artifact deck because they just have an untapped Psymaster Thopterist and a Thopter. Those two together can only deal 2 damage, so it doesn't matter if they block or not. Krinko is not going to die, and we really like that about him. Okay. And I think that the Thopters are going to decide not to block this turn. And the reason I'm deciding not to is because I'm afraid of what the elves can do. And the 2 damage from our goblin over here isn't too much of a concern at this point. And we can always create Thopters to block Krinko. And hopefully we can just keep doing that over and over again. So we're going to take the 2 damage, which means that here's another aspect of Commander, is that whenever a player takes damage from a commander, if they end up taking 21 or more damage, then they lose the game from that one commander. So Krinko has now dealt 2 damage to Krinko has now dealt 2 damage to the Thopter deck, which means that if they deal another 19 damage with Krinko only, then the Thopter deck will lose the game automatically. And that builds up over the course of the entire game. So that's why I'm writing it down here so that we don't forget. We'll have this to remind us later on in case it becomes relevant. And I'm putting it to the side over here. You can kind of see. Okay, so now the turn structure we talked about goes untap, upkeep, draw. After that is called main phase 1, which is the phase where you play all of your cards. You can play sorceries, creatures, enchantments, artifacts, planeswalkers, all sorts of different things, including instants and sorceries. You can play your lands during the main phase. And then after that main phase, you go into the combat phase. And the combat phase and a bunch of the other phases during the turn can only have instant speed things happen. You can't cast a sorcery, you can't cast a creature. You have to do that during your main phase. So after the combat phase, though, there is a second main phase where you can, again, cast spells or play lands if you want to, especially if you haven't reached your max land playing for the turn, because you can only play 1 land per turn. Okay, so it's good to wait until the second main phase to play spells if you can, if it makes sense to, so that your opponents can't make decisions about how they're blocking or not blocking based on what you've already played. They have to wait until your second main phase. So that's kind of a strategy tip. If you're looking for tips, you may not be. You may want to figure it out yourself, but that is a good tip for later on if you want to. So we are going to use all of our mana to cast Krinko Mob Boss. And the reason that we're doing it now is because the longer Krinko Mob Boss is out, the better off it is for us. The faster we can get it out, the more advantage we'll have, because Krinko by himself creates a ton of goblins. Every goblin you control, he creates another goblin on top of that. So next turn, basically we'll be able to, we could attack with Krinko, make 2 more goblins, play a goblin from our hand, tap this other Krinko, and make, like 6 or 7 goblins in a single turn. So that's going to be really advantageous to us to have Krinko out now. It does put us possibly in the crosshairs of the elf deck, which is doing really, really well right now. So we are going to have to be careful about that, but hopefully we don't die in a single turn and then not be able to. So essentially, the good thing is that we may be able to chump block with our with the goblins that Krinko creates. So for now, though, we'll go to the elves, who are going to untap and untap, upkeep, draw a card, and the card is a forest, which again, not great, but that's okay. So we will go ahead and play the forest. I think we want to go ahead and tap that forest in order to play Heritage Druid. And whenever we play a creature spell, we draw a card from Guardian Project. So another forest, of course. Okay, so now let's see how much mana we can generate here. So we can do 2 here. This is 1 more, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I want to keep Oran Reef off to the side. So we're at 6 mana. Then Priest of Titania taps for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana. Itlamok taps for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana. So I have 16 mana total. That's really good because we are going to start getting crazy here. Okay, so we are going to pay 1 forest to be able to cast Jiraga Warcaller. Now, Jiraga Warcaller has this really cool ability that so he starts off with just a 1 green and a 1/1 creature, but he has this ability called Multi-Kicker. So, Multi-Kicker means that it enters the battle. Multi-Kicker is an additional cost that you pay whenever you cast a spell, or whenever you cast this spell. So as an additional cost, we may pay a colorless or a green, or a colorless and a green, as many times as we want to. And then each time we do, Jiraga Warcaller comes into play with that many +1/+1 counters. And then other elves we control get +1/+1 for each of the counters on Jiraga Warcaller. So we're going to tap this for 5 mana, Priest of Titania for 5 mana, so that's 10 total, 11, 12, 13, 14. So 14 mana means that we activate the Multi-Kicker 7 times. So Jiraga Warcaller is going to come into play with 7 +1/+1 counters. But we also have this Oran Reef Fastwood. So, well, first we cast a creature spell, so Guardian Project triggers. Oh wait, we get an additional one off of Priest of Titania because of the Ley Line of Abundance. So let's go ahead and, since we have 1 extra, we will go ahead and tap Arbor Elf to untap this forest, and we will pay an additional 1. So instead, we're going to get 1 more counter on Jiraga Warcaller. So that's 8. Sorry. So now we need to draw a card for Guardian Project. It's a forest. Okay. That's fine. That's fine. We can manage. Okay, so now we're going to do something with Oran Reef the Vastwood. We're going to go ahead and tap it and put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So that's Heritage Druid and Jiraga Warcaller. So now that means that... here we go. That means that... No, wait, do we want to do this now? Actually, let's wait just a little bit. Let's wait just a little bit. Okay, so... that means that now all of our elves are getting an additional +8/+8 on top of whatever else they had before. So let's see what else we can do. I told you that Devoted Druid could only do something if... it could only activate again if we were able to somehow mitigate the problem with it having only 1 toughness, because if we tried to put another -1/-1 counter, it would kill Devoted Druid. Jiraga Warcaller is actually giving it more toughness, so now it's not 1 toughness, it's actually 9 toughness because of Jiraga Warcaller. So we're going to untap Devoted Druid to put another -1/-1 counter on it. So now we can tap it for 2 mana. Oh wait, we're going to untap it again, put another -1/-1 counter on it. So now we got 4 mana. Oh wait, let's do it again. Now 4 -1/-1 counters. And Devoted Druid can now tap for another 2 mana. So, what does that mean? That means that we have another elf in hand that we can cast. So we're going to go ahead and cast Voice of the Woods. And when we cast a creature spell, we get to draw a card. And it's Multani's Acolyte. Holy crap. Like a good card, or like a good card for what we're trying to do. So we do have 1 green mana floating. So let's go ahead and now we'll put this up to 5 to untap Devoted Druid. We will tap it again for 2 more mana to cast Multani's Acolyte. It only costs 2 mana. It's a 2/1 elf with Echo. So Echo just means that during our next upkeep, we have to pay its cost again or get rid of it. But when it comes into play, we draw a card. So Guardian Project is going to draw us a card. It is a forest. Then Multani's Acolyte is going to draw us a card, and it is an elf. You see where this is going? Okay, so now this elf only costs 1 green mana. We were floating 1 green from before, so we're going to cast that one, which means we draw a card from Guardian Project, and it is, unfortunately, a forest in this case. That being said, now we can go ahead and activate Oran Reef the Vastwood, and we have 5 different creatures that are coming in that have +1/+1 counters. So let's go ahead and do that. So Jiraga Warcaller goes up to 9. Voice of the Woods gets a counter. Multani's Acolyte gets a counter. Quirion Ranger gets a counter. And so does Heritage Druid. So we need 2 more dice. Heritage Druid and the Quirion Ranger. So, Quirion Ranger's ability, so it's a 1 cost, 1 green, 1/1 elf, and it has return a forest you control to its owner's hand, and then untap a target creature, and we can only use this ability once per turn. So, I think we actually do want to use that effect. We're going to go ahead and return this forest to our hand. No, that's not a forest. That's Oran Reef. Let's return an actual forest to our hand. And we're going to untap Priest of Titania. So, our Priest of Titania before was only tapping for 5 mana, remember? Now it's tapping for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mana. So, we have 2 different things that we could do here. Actually, 10 mana because of Leyline of Abundance. So, the thing that we could do here is we could activate Azuri Renegade Leader's ability twice, or we could activate Leyline of Abundance's ability and have 2 mana left over. I think what we want to do is actually activate Renegade Leader's ability. We are going to tap Priest of Titania for 10 mana, which will allow us to activate Azuri Renegade Leader's ability twice, which means that all of our elf creatures get +3/+3 and trample twice, which means +6/+6. And Azuri Renegade Leader can attack this turn. Everything else is either tapped or came into play this turn, so this guy can't attack. These 3 can't attack, and this one can't attack. So, Azuri Renegade Leader is going to be able to attack this turn. And, oh my gosh, it is a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, +6, 9, +9, 18 damage creature. Wow. And it has trample as well. So I think that actually, I wouldn't normally recommend this, but since we have this setup now, I think we're going to go ahead and play out what we would really do here. So Renegade Leader's ability, we don't have any mana floating right now, but we activate Renegade Leader's ability twice. So Devoted Druid actually has another 6 power or 6 toughness that's not being used right now. I think we want to activate Azuri Renegade Leader one more time because what that will do is that'll put us at 21 commander damage, and we actually may want to activate it 2 more times if we can, because that means that we essentially are going to be able to kill one player this turn. Literally this turn. There's nothing that anybody will be able to do about it, I don't think. So let's untap Devoted Druid, tap it again. So that's 2. Let's go ahead and keep track here so we don't forget. So this is actually, I know we have a green die here. So 2 mana, so we'll untap Devoted Druid. Now he has 7 -1/-1 counters. Tap him again. So 4 mana. So we need to get up to 10 mana again. So to be able to do that, we need to activate this 3 more times. So that means 10 counters. And we have our 10 mana that we need to activate Azuri Renegade Leader 2 more times. So he's gotten plus 12, plus... Sorry. He has 12 from activating his ability 4 times. He has another 9, so that's 21 damage with Draga War Caller. And then another 3 on top of that, so that's 24. So is that enough to kill somebody? Let's see. I'm thinking here. I don't think it's quite enough, but what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and sacrifice Devoted Druid. So essentially, we need 21 plus 4 damage, or 21, yeah. So it's 21 plus 4 damage. We need to get to 25 damage total to be able to kill off either of the 2 players. Azuri Renegade Leader is currently, we said 12 plus 11, or 12 plus 9 is 21, plus 3 is 24, so that we need to activate 1 more time. So that means that 3 more -1/-1 counters on Devoted Druid gets us up to 16 mana. So yeah, I mean 6 more mana on top of what we had before. So that's enough activations to kill 1 player this turn, but it also means that Devoted Druid is going to die this turn. Or at the end of our turn, all of the pump effects from Azuri Renegade Leader are going to go down, and are going to disappear, and all of these -1/-1 counters is going to kill Devoted Druid. But we do take out 1 player, and between all of the cards that are out right now, Goblins are the worst threat, because they can create a bunch of they can start creating more and more and more Goblins every turn. So we want to avoid that. We're going to go ahead and kill the Goblins this turn, unfortunately. Poor Goblins are dead now. And then so before we end the turn, we could do this ability Voice of the Woods to tap 5 untapped elves we control and create a 7/7 elemental creature token with trample. So let's go ahead and do that, because we have 5 untapped elves. And the reason that we can do this one, which seems really weird why we would be able to tap 5 elves that came into play this turn, is that this ability is external. It's basically an ability that's forcing creatures to tap. It's not giving those creatures an ability that includes a tap symbol. There's a kind of a weird difference with that. So it means that we can go ahead and activate this guy's ability to put a 7/7 elemental with trample into play. So let's go ahead and do that. Elemental 7/7, and a tree, I guess, right? A tree can be like a angry tree. Rawr. And we'll give it some branches here. I mean, it's not going to matter too much since we're we're at the end here, but I'm just kind of being silly. Trample. Okay. We've done everything that we can possibly do. The turn ends, and that means that our devoted druid is toast. Okay, so let's go ahead and go over to the Thopter deck. Yeah, poor goblins. Getting the shaft as usual. Because I'm mean to them, I think. Okay. So, untap. Untap. So basically, we have to see if we can figure out something to get ourselves out of this. So we're going to untap, draw a card for the turn. Commander Sphere, not a great card for what we're going to have to try to figure out. Let's go ahead and get all of the mana that we can. So we will play an island, then we will tap to create another Darksteel Citadel. So let's see what we can do. I think that we just have to try to, because none of these cards have an effect that will immediately win us the game, unfortunately. We have to essentially return all of our opponent's creatures to their hand this turn if we can. So all that we're going to do is we're going to tap 2. We're going to sacrifice this artifact and this artifact. So our Darksteel Citadel, actually we'll tap the one that doesn't have a picture on it. We will sacrifice these 2 artifacts from Size ability to draw ourselves a card. Not a card that's going to help us. So let's go ahead, and I think that that's essentially it for us. But let's go ahead and pay 3 and play Commander Sphere, which has its own ability to sacrifice. So we will go ahead and sacrifice Commander Sphere. Well, we'll tap it for a blue mana, and then we will sacrifice it to draw a card. And it's a land. Okay, so unfortunately, that's essentially all that. I mean, that's about all that we can do. We'll go ahead and play. No, wait, we already played an island. So, but we did get a mana from Commander Sphere. Let's go ahead and tap 3, and we will play Junk Diver, which, because it's an artifact, will give us a free Thopter. And unfortunately, pass the turn to a very angry elf deck. So, at the end of the Thopter's turn, though, we still can activate Quirion Ranger over with these elves. So we're going, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes, and that's still enough. So we're going to return a forest from the battlefield to our hand to untap Priest of Titania, which will then tap for 8 mana. And because we have 8 mana, we're going to activate Leyline of Abundance to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. So that is what we're going to do. 2/2. Arbor Elf gets its first +1/+1 counter. 1 on Jiraga Warcaller. 2 here, 2 here. Okay. So now it is the elves, back to the elves' turn. We are going to untap all of this nonsense. So much nonsense. Untap, draw a card for the turn. Oh wait, we get one on our other guy too. There we go. On our elemental. It's a forest, that's fine. That we weren't going to play too much this turn. We're just going to play that forest. Now let us go ahead and activate our Azuri Renegade Leader as many times as we can. So we are going to tap Itlamok for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 mana. Let's go ahead and keep track of that. So, oh wait, that's not a good one. Hang on a second. I'm trying to find 10-sided dice here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we have 9 mana available to us. We're going to tap Priest of Titania for another mana. So this is our untapped lands. So we are going to tap Priest of Titania for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mana. So that's 17. And then we are going to... Oh wait, we need to pay 2 mana for Maltali's advocate or apostle, so we are going to go ahead and pay that cost because we can. Now let's see, how much else do we want? I think we just want to return one of these forests to our hand for Quirion Ranger, and then we'll tap Priest of Titanium one more time. So we'll get another 8 mana. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Another 8 mana, which puts us up to 25. And that is enough to activate Azuri 5 times, which means all of our creatures are going to get plus 15, plus 15. So how much damage is that? That's a good question. Because it's going to be a lot of damage. That's a lot of damage. And that's only elf creatures, so our poor elemental here is not going to get all that much. Yeah, we just have a bunch of this stuff. We could go ahead and tap one and do... No, I guess we don't even want to do that, really. Okay, so all of our creatures have trample. It's 15 times 8. So... Oh, let me think. 120? Is that right? Let me see. 8 times 15. Yeah, it's 120. Okay, so that's 120 by itself. They get another... We get 10 power 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. So that's 200 damage total with just that. So then we add up all of the other +1/+1 counters and their power and toughness. So that's 5 plus 8, or 3 is 8, then 12 and 14, 14, 18, 21, and then 21 plus 8 is 29. So 229 damage attacking with one player with these elves. That is bonkers. That is super bonkers. But that's how it goes sometimes. That's how elves happen sometimes. And now, mind you, I don't... So, okay, so here's... Unfortunately, we did get to see... Okay, I shouldn't say unfortunately. The artifact deck was getting some good cards. We were able to sort of draw our way out of it. So that was actually a plus. The Goblin deck also drew itself out, and it ended up being a really, really good hand. We managed to get all of the mana we could possibly want, and a bunch of creatures that are really, really good. I think that both of the other decks performed really well. And I think that the Elf deck, it looks really powerful, but the fact of the matter is that these cards are in here so that if you're playing this deck and you're wondering what you're trying to do, you can puzzle these things together. You can actually create all of these cogs that work together to create this nonsense. But most players probably aren't going to be able to figure it out their first try. And this deck is sort of designed to not be able to do that too often. Like, you still can, but I want it to be sort of a later game type thing. Now, we are kind of earlier game, and this was a really, really lucky hand with the cards that we were able to get. But generally speaking, this isn't going to happen every time. I just want it to happen just enough so that people get excited to play it. People get excited to see this kind of thing happen, to see what is possible when you do put the pieces together and you have the right cards working in tandem to do this kind of stuff. So I'm actually still not really concerned about this elf deck. I mean, I'll always be a little bit concerned because I don't want it to be too strong, but I do think that this is a really good place for this deck, because we've seen the elf deck play like 3 or 4 times now, and I think it's 3. I think 3 is probably the right number. So this is maybe the 4th game with it, and the other 3 games, They did some cool things, but they didn't get this kind of craziness that's possible. And I don't think it's going to happen often enough to be a problem with these beginner decks. So while this stuff, you would have to like be able to see all these different things and put it all together that this is something that you could do. But I don't expect beginner players to be able to figure that out, which will help stop this kind of craziness from happening. But that being said, if you are seeing an elf deck for the first time, you're seeing this kind of insanity, this only gets more and more consistent. Elves can be a kind of like a competitive level deck if you build it right. So, I mean, not like the highest level of like if there was some really terrible scale that didn't really tell you about how powerful decks are, but you wanted to give it some kind of a scale. People have been using a kind of 1 to 10 scale, and 10 being like the ultra, like top of the line competitive decks. Elves can be like a mid 8 to a low 9 essentially. Like it is right there, right on the bleeding edge of being really, really, really good all the time. And this deck is not built to be that. It's meant to be a beginner deck that can sometimes do exactly what you're seeing right now. So if you're seeing this for the first time, this is an exciting deck to play. And I do recommend taking a look at Elves if this kind of thing interests you. This is a lot of bookkeeping to try to keep track of, and it took us a little bit to get through the turn to make sure that we did it how we wanted to do it. But I still highly recommend giving it a shot. Okay, so I think that about wraps up our game. If you have any questions, this will be posted on YouTube. You can leave a comment there, and I'll be sure to answer. I'll probably pretty quickly see it. So leave any questions that you have, and thank you all for watching. I really like doing this. I like sitting down and talking about Magic and showing this kind of stuff too, because it's really cool to do stuff like this. It's really cool to kind of go crazy a little bit. So thank you all for watching, and we will continue with Guild Wars on Wednesday, so you can catch me at that point. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll see you next time.